I had always found solace in silence, a quiet communion with my own thoughts. That's why the advertisement for a night librarian at the old Blackwood Municipal Archives seemed like an answer to a silent prayer. Midnight to dawn shift, excellent pay, minimal interaction. It was perfect. I pictured long, tranquil hours among towering stacks of dusty tomes. The only sound the soft rustle of turning pages or the ancient building's low, steady hum. The interview was surprisingly brief, almost dismissive. Mr. Albright, the head librarian, was a gaunt man with eyes perpetually shadowed by fatigue. He barely acknowledged my presence, his voice a dry rasp, like leaves skittering across pavement. "You'll be entirely alone," he stated, not asked. "Just maintain security, reshelve any overnight returns, and ensure nothing goes amiss." He pressed a heavy brass key into my hand, along with a crisp sheet of official duties. "Can you start tonight?" Eager for the solitude and the promised pay, I agreed instantly. "We've had a bit of trouble keeping night staff," Albright added, almost as an afterthought, rubbing his temples as if to ward off a headache. "They say the quiet gets to them. Hope you'll be different." I shrugged off his words, chalking it up to typical small-town gossip or perhaps a slight exaggeration to emphasize the job's isolation. That evening, the Blackwood Archives loomed under a sliver of moon, its Gothic stone facade casting long, skeletal shadows that danced in the dim streetlights. The grand oak doors groaned shut behind me, a sound like a sepulchral sigh, sealing me within. The air, thick with the comforting scent of aged paper and dust, seemed to press in, a palpable embrace. The main reading room was a vast, echoing cavern, lined with towering bookshelves that vanished into the upper gloom, their contents lost to the perpetual twilight. I settled into the main desk, my single lamp casting a lonely circle of light that barely challenged the pervasive darkness beyond. Around midnight, a soft, rhythmic shuffling broke the profound silence. My heart hammered against my ribs as I jumped, but I saw only an elderly man emerging from the maze of stacks, pushing a cleaning cart. He had a halo of wispy white hair and spectacles perched on a nose reddened by age, his blue uniform a shade too large, almost comical. "Didn't mean to startle you, Sonny?" The old man chuckled, his voice surprisingly robust for his apparent frailty. "You must be the new night fellow, name's Silas. Been tidying up these old bones for 40 years. I offered a nervous, forced smile. "Elias, I didn't realize there was a night janitor." Silas leaned closer, his eyes twinkling, a strange, knowing glint in their depths. "Oh, they always keep one of us around. Just make sure everything's ready for the morning." His tone then shifted, growing grave, the humor draining from his face. "But there are other rules here, Sonny. Not the ones old Albright gave you." He pulled a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper from his pocket, its edges soft and worn with age. "These," he declared, his voice dropping, "are the rules to keep you safe through the night." I took the paper, half expecting some anachronistic joke, perhaps a list of absurd regulations from a bygone era. But the list was anything but funny. Rules for a quiet night at the archives. Do not read aloud from any book published before 1900, especially those bound in dark leather. Their stories are best left unspoken. If you hear whispers from the stacks, do not try to identify the words or their source. They are not meant for you. If a book you just reshelved reappears on the main desk, do not touch it again. Simply leave it. It has unfinished business. If you see a figure in the periphery of the stacks, do not turn to face it directly. They are only echoes and they fade if ignored. If the grandfather clock in the main hall strikes an hour it has already struck, immediately return to the main desk and do not leave until the chime has passed its true time. Never leave a book open overnight on any table or lectern. It invites attention. If your reflection in the main hall's polished brass shows anything other than yourself, look away immediately and do not return to that area for at least 15 minutes. I scoffed, a nervous, disbelieving sound. "You're serious?" Silas's grin had completely vanished, replaced by a chillingly solemn expression. "I'm warning you, Sonny. Follow the rules or you'll end up like the last few. Didn't last a single week. They quit. I managed to ask, stuffing the unsettling paper into my pocket, my fingers still tracing the worn edges. Silas merely gave me a long, piercing look, then simply mumbled, "Take care," before disappearing back into the shadowy labyrinth of the shelves, his cleaning cart creaking softly in the distance. I tried to shake off the creeping unease, convincing myself it was just an old man indulging in a strange, antiquated prank, part of the archive's charm. My first round began just after 1 a.m. The archives felt subtly different now, somehow more alive, more aware. The shadows seemed to writhe in the corners of my vision, the pervasive silence pulsed with an unseen, unheard energy. As I patrolled the dimly lit history section, a faint, almost imperceptible rustling sound reached my ears like countless dry pages being turned in unison. Rule 2. If you hear whispers from the stacks, do not try to identify the words or their source. I quickened my pace, trying desperately to ignore it, but the rustling grew, transforming into a chorus of hushed voices, a cacophony of unintelligible whispers, as if 1,000 ancient secrets were suddenly trying to break free from their papery prisons. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut for a moment, forcing myself to walk faster, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The whispers seemed to swirl around me, brushing against my skin, a cold, dry breath, until finally I burst into the relative quiet of the front hall, gasping for breath. I leaned against a cold bookshelf, my chest heaving, trying to rationalize it all as merely the old building settling, or a trick of my overactive imagination. I glanced almost involuntarily at the main desk. A book lay there, a large, intimidating leather-bound volume titled Chronicles of Blackwood. I distinctly remembered shelving that very book in the local history section less than an hour ago. Rule 3. If a book you just reshelved reappears on the main desk, do not touch it again. Simply leave it. My stomach twisted into a knot. This was no prank. I continued my rounds, now meticulously trying to stick to the more open, better-lit areas. As I passed the biography section, where the shadows seemed particularly dense, I caught a fleeting flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. A tall, slender figure, standing motionless between two towering shelves. Its form was indistinct, a deeper shadow within the gloom. Rule 4. If you see a figure in the periphery of the stacks, do not turn to face it directly. I forced myself to keep walking, my eyes fixed rigidly straight ahead, but the figure seemed to drift alongside me, always just out of my direct line of sight, a silent, shadowy companion. I could almost feel its cold, stale breath on the back of my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut for a brief, desperate moment, then opened them and the figure was gone. I let out a shaky, silent breath of relief. Then, the deep, resonant bong of the grandfather clock in the main hall echoed through the building. 1 strike. I instinctively checked my watch. 2:30 a.m. The clock struck again. 2 strikes, then again. 3. Kept chiming, faster and faster, a jarring, impossible rhythm. It chimed 12 times, then 13, 14, 15, until the very air around me vibrated with its unnatural, cacophonous song. My watch, stubbornly, still read 2:30 a.m. Rule 5. If the grandfather clock in the main hall strikes an hour it has already struck, immediately return to the main desk and do not leave until the chime has passed its true time. I bolted, stumbling blindly through the main reading room, the relentless, impossible chimes reverberating painfully in my skull. I dove behind the main desk, burying my head in my arms, trying to block out the sound, but the chimes grew louder, more frantic, more insistent, until it felt as though they would consume me whole. Suddenly, an abrupt, absolute silence. The chimes stopped. I slowly lifted my head, trembling, my ears ringing with the phantom echoes. The grandfather clock stood utterly silent, its ornate pendulum frozen. I checked my watch again. 3:15 a.m. The time had finally, impossibly, caught up. I spent the next hour hunched behind the desk, clutching the crumpled rules list, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the paper steady. I had already broken too many of the rules. At 4 a.m., a soft, persistent scratching sound began. It seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, 1,000 tiny claws dragging across rough stone, a low, grating whisper against the silence. I peered at the security monitors, my gaze darting from screen to screen. The cameras showed nothing but empty shelves and dim, eerily still corridors. Yet, the scratching grew more insistent, like something desperate to get in, or perhaps desperate to get out. Then, a faint, almost melodicum. I froze, every nerve-ending tingling. It was coming from the rare books section, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to seep into my very bones. I frantically scanned my rules list again. Nothing about humming. The mall story had a rule about escalators. This was something else entirely. Curiosity, a dangerous, primal urge, began to override my terror. The hum grew, a hypnotic drone that seemed to pull me towards it, an irresistible, unseen current. I rose, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline, and slowly, reluctantly made my way towards the rare books section, ignoring every instinct that screamed at me to stay put, to run, to simply disappear. The hum intensified with each hesitant step, transforming into a low, resonant, almost chanted vibration. I rounded the final corner, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the thick gloom. There, in the very center of the rare books room, a single ancient tome lay open on a display pedestal. Its leather cover was a deep, lightless black, its pages brittle and yellowed with unimaginable age. The pervasive hum emanated directly from it, a living sound. Rule 6. Never leave a book open overnight on any table or lectern. Someone had left it open, or something had. I remembered Rule 1. Do not read aloud from any book published before 1900, especially those bound in dark leather. This book looked older than time itself. As I stood there, frozen by a mixture of dread and morbid fascination, the humming intensified, rising to a fever pitch, and the air around the book began to shimmer, distorting the shelves behind it. The arcane words on the open pages seemed to shift, rearranging themselves before my eyes, glowing faintly with an eerie, inner light. Then, a voice, impossibly deep and resonant, seemed to rise from the very pages, speaking in a language I couldn't comprehend, yet it filled my mind with an overwhelming, ancient sense of utter despair. I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge, a desperate compulsion, to close the book, to silence the terrible voice. As I reached for it, my hand trembling, a gnarled, shadowy hand, formed from pure darkness, shot out from behind the pedestal, slamming the book shut with a resounding thud that echoed through the silent archives. The hum ceased, the shimmering stopped, the room plunged back into an oppressive, absolute silence. I gasped, stumbling backward, tripping over my own feet. The shadowy hand receded into the impenetrable darkness behind the pedestal, and I saw a figure standing there, tall and impossibly gaunt, shrouded in robes that seemed to absorb what little dim light there was. It was the figure from the periphery, no longer just an echo, but solid, menacing, its presence chilling the very air. I bolted, running blindly, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror, back towards the main desk. I didn't look back, didn't dare risk another glance. I reached the desk, slamming my palm on the wooden surface, gasping for air, my lungs burning. I glanced, wild-eyed, at the monitor feeds. The rare book section was utterly empty. The book on the pedestal was closed. The last hour passed in agonizing slowness. I sat rigidly, hunched behind the desk, clutching the crumpled rules list, its words a fragile shield against the terror. I stared, unblinking, at the main doors, waiting, praying, for the first faint light of dawn. At 6 a.m. sharp, the lock clicked with a startlingly mundane sound, and Mr. Albright stepped in, looking as tired and drawn as ever. "Morning, Elias. Rough night." I could only manage a nod, my throat too tight, too dry to speak. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Albright chuckled, a weary, mirthless sound. Then his brow furrowed, his expression shifting to concern. "Are you all right? You're sweating." I think so." I stammered, my voice raspy. "The janitor, Silas, he gave me some strange rules." Mr. Albright's expression hardened, his tired eyes suddenly sharp. "Silas? There's no Silas. Not for decades. The last night janitor we had, he vanished back in the 60s. They said he just faded away in the archives one night, leaving only his cleaning cart." I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold rush of understanding. "But he..." He handed me these rules, I whispered, pulling the crumpled, yellowed paper from my pocket, its aged surface feeling impossibly cold in my hand. Albright took the paper, his eyes widening as he read the simple title, Rules for a Quiet Night at the Archives. He looked at me, a strange, knowing, almost pitying look in his tired eyes. Elias, this is the original list, the one Silas compiled. He was trying to warn them. He was trying to warn you. I stared at the ancient paper, then at the empty, innocuous cleaning cart parked by the staff entrance. If Silas had vanished decades ago, truly disappeared, then who had I spoken to tonight? Who had given me these rules? And who or what had closed the terrible book? The Blackwood Municipal Archives, once a place of comforting quiet and solace, now felt like a vast, breathing mausoleum of forgotten souls and untold horrors. And I realized with a chilling, sickening dread that I was no longer just a librarian. I was, inescapably, a new entry in its haunting, unending chronicles. That's when I decided this is no place to be in. I was so afraid of everything that happened that night that I never got back again. I guess some things or some places are better left alone.